Yeah, exactly right. You have 29,000 freight brokerages out there. As you quoted, the last 3 years, you had 25,000 formed and
Yeah.
only, roughly 10,000, 9.7 thousand that are still active. And then you take that, what percentage of those are still one or two employees?
Right.
A high percentage. And that 30,000 number, there is a very high percentage, probably 90%, are sub 5 employees, right? So if you are selling a product that doesn't really fit in that market, right, you need 10 seats to really have a hold of that market, then there's a 90% of the market or so that you don't even need to speak to right now. You need to focus in on these 1,000, 2,000 companies, freight brokerages out there, and that's where your ICP resides.
Welcome to the ThinkFreight Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Werdine. It's my pleasure to have Kevin Hill, founder of Brush Pass Research. Kevin, welcome to ThinkFreight Podcast. Thanks for coming on today, man.
Hey, thanks, Thomas. Always great seeing you and sitting in here on the podcast.
I appreciate it, man. I really do. You've got a lot of really fun experience, from your time at FreightWaves with the podcast. Put that coffee down, or put down the coffee. You've done a lot in freight and freight tech. So I wanted to have you on and kind of talk about your experience, your background, and what you're building at Brush Pass Research. I think it's really interesting. You've been sharing a lot of really cool data and charts on LinkedIn and online, which is just really, really fascinating with what's going on in the market. So why don't we dive right in, talk a little bit about kind of your background and how you originally got into the freight space.
Yeah, so my background is I'm an archaeologist to start out with, and moved to New York, did a lot of financial publishing and this and that, market research, and came back to Oklahoma, did an MBA, and couldn't find a job, so became a freight broker. As always, right?
Typical, the typical route.
Typical route. So did that for 3 or 4 years, and got tired of losing out on deals because I couldn't find the capacity that I needed. So I started a company called CarrierLists, and what we did is called carriers and what kind of trailers do you run? Is it dry van, flatbed, reefer? What specializations? And then, of course, what lanes do you like to run? So made those calls, built this database, and sold it to freight brokers, and ran into Craig at FreightWaves, and in 2019, came over as director of research and then managed editorial, ran day-to-day operations in media for a couple of years, and I got the entrepreneurship itch again and decided to come back out, Brush Pass Research, and it's kind of what I use to market to freight brokers in the beginning. And I know a lot of tech companies need help and need data to help them navigate those waters. So that's what Brush Pass is really all about, is that Rolodex or that CRM, that dream CRM that you can get in 5 minutes.
That's really cool. I love the summary, but let's dive really into something that you said. So you create a carrier list. So when in the process did you create that? How long in your freight journey were you? When did you create that? When you created that? Excuse me.
Yeah, so I'd done 2 years at Melton Logistics, and then I got out of the industry for a year and got back into it with a company called Washita Valley Logistics, and it was attached to a shipper. They're in Norman, Oklahoma, and spent a couple years there before I kind of quit everything and went full time into CarrierLists.
Yeah, that's really cool. And then you said you basically were just frustrated with not being able to source certain capacity or losing out on business because of missed capacity. So it sounds like you guys were helping create where capacity lives. Is that correct?
Yeah. So like at Milton Logistics, we were really good at cross-border, flatbed. We knew that market really well. You get into dry vans, and it was a mystery to us. it's bread and butter to most people, is a mystery to us.
Right.
So you have pricing, and this was back in 2016, 2015, 2015, 2016, 2017. Is the core of it. Pricing tools weren't all that great. It was tough to price, and then there was some off the wall loads, right? So one of the pieces of business that really made me create CarrierLists was I needed to find from Dallas to Ohio. It was like 3 loads a week. Really good money in it. Or I thought there was really good money in it. It was not hazmat, but it was liquid. And I think it was over 1,000 gallons or 1,000 pounds, whatever that is. And they just changed the rule back then in like 2015, 2016, to where you need a hazmat permit to carry that liquid. And finding that is just nearly impossible. So I couldn't find capacity for that. Oftentimes, heavy haul is another really, really nice niche that you seem to always go back and get quotes for your customers from those handful of carriers that you deal with on a daily or a weekly basis, which is good. But then again, you might have some lane or some job that doesn't really fit within their business, and they're going to quote you high. You're going to quote your customer high. You're going to lose that business. So I'd really know everyone who does heavy haul instead of just the handful of people within my network. So it was really about sourcing carriers.
Yeah, and that's definitely a really big issue, or tended to be a pretty big issue before a lot of freight tech companies have come in and tried to help people source, help carriers or brokers source carriers. And I think that's a very interesting way to go about it. Now, how did you guys sell that to brokers? How did that go? How'd that go over to those brokerages?
Yeah, so in 2017 and early 2018, I'm not a technology guy. That was my first venture into entrepreneurship, so I didn't know anything. Yeah. And technology-wise, I didn't know anything. And on the freight broker, I was a freight broker, but I didn't know other freight brokers, right? So I didn't know anybody, right? I was unknown to the industry, if you'd say. And I sold spreadsheets. I sold just spreadsheets. I had a Shopify account. You pay a flat rate and you download a spreadsheet. And until about April of 2018, when I partnered with SaferWatch, and it became a tool within SaferWatch until January of 2022, when that business, CarrierLists, I sold that to Highway, and it was kind of the original module that Highway had. And they've taken that sourcing and that capability to the nth level, right? Not even next level, to supersonic levels. Jordan and his team over there, and rebranded that Highway, and it's a great tool still to source carriers.
No, I love that. I was just going to touch on that because I know you and I have talked about that in the past, and I thought that was a really interesting move that you guys both made. I think it benefited both Highway and yourselves to kind of do that. Now, how did that kind of come about? Were you guys ever like in talks to like partner or anything like that, or was it just an outright sale or and things like that?
Yeah, it was an outright sell. He was he was just gearing up Highway. He was taking that from an idea to the natural evolution from an idea to a PowerPoint to putting everything in place to launch it. So it was always just a straight out acquisition of the company, the products, the customer book, all of those good things.
No, that's really cool. Now I want to pivot a little bit into content creation and kind of what you were doing with your podcast of FreightWaves. How did you get into podcasting, creating content?
I showed up at FreightWaves. That's really how I got into it. I didn't know I was getting into it. I was coming in to be director of research, and they had a GoPro back in the office. On the days you've seen what's now the TV studio used to be our office. We had about 100 people in there. I sat in the hallway at some point in front of the big boards before the pandemic, and everyone went home. But you were told, hey, get up there and get on camera for our GoPro 20-minute episodes that we did every day back then. And that's really how I got into content. Then Dooner showed up a few weeks after I did in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and learned. I learned a lot from him. And we actually started put that coffee down together back in 2019, and I think Craig came in and just said, "Hey," it just started giving podcasts away. We're going to create a lot of content. We're going to have a lot of podcasts going at once. So we had great quarter guys, the research division, and then a few months later we started put that coffee down. But that's really how I got into it. I wasn't even looking to get into it. I was kind of thrown into it, which was great in retrospect, because I probably wouldn't have ever done it on my own.
Yeah, that's really awesome. Kind of when you get thrown into the fire and do something that, kind of gets you out of your comfort zone. I think that's really, really, really where a lot of growth happens. And obviously it's pushed you down a lot of really good paths. I think that that podcast, I think that's how, I kind of first heard of you, before I ever joined FreightWaves, was because of that podcast. I listened to it a lot when I was a freight broker. I think it was really interesting content. And it kind of helped me get into I would listen to it in the mornings, but right before, start making calls, because it just kind of gets you in the right mindset, kind of helps you, think about what's going on. And so it was kind of my first findings of FreightWaves really was your podcast and some of their content they were creating, a lot of the podcast content. So yeah, I think that's really cool. Would you, do you still create like podcast content, or have any itch to or any desire to do that anymore?
Well, thank you for the compliment. Number one, I'm glad it was you listened to it and it was an inspiration. Yeah. I do, right? So I think today, as we record, I think we're releasing our first podcast. Richie Daigle and myself, we used to put that coffee down both when we were both at FreightWaves, called The Last Sell. And it's really diving into sales stories from people who've been there, had a great career, finding out what they learned most from a deal, what they learned most in the negative way about a deal, the biggest deal they ever did, the most stressful, and just kind of learning through story and storytelling. And we've recorded 3 so far.
Love that.
The first one's with Will Jenkins over at Mullo. He was on your podcast not too long ago. And then Andy Paul, who's outside our industry, but is really big into B2B sales. And then Kevin Nolan, or first 3 episodes. So we have 3 great guests, and we'll be releasing those throughout January.
No, that's really amazing. How, what is the format like? Is it longer form content, shorter form content? What is that format like?
It's between that 30 and 45 minutes. So
Very nice.
It's something that, and I think if it goes an hour, that's fine.
Yeah.
I know short form content it's great. Short form content is great. I'm starting to really like the really long form content, maybe an hour and a half. If you get the right mix of people there, I can sit there and listen to a podcast, the same episode, for an hour and a half if I'm interested. And it is a great marketing tool. If you want to create a podcast, create one, and then live with the fact that no one might listen to it for a year and a half.
Right.
Doesn't matter. It's a fun exercise. And if you do it enough, if you promote it enough, then it will gain traction.
Absolutely. And it comes down to that consistency. It comes down to just kind of believing in what you do, and also just kind of every day looking at your content, or how often you're creating your content, and seeing how you can level up that content from an episode to episode basis.
And I think when you say short form, is taking that long form and cutting it up in short form I think that's the best recipe that you can have.
I agree.
I think that's what we're really going to try to do, is we're going to do that.
Love that.
30, 45 minutes to an hour if it's a really good conversation, and then try to cut it up as much as possible.
No, I love that. I think that's definitely the right way to go. And touching back on something you said, I've also gotten into some of that longer form content where I found myself, sitting and listening to even like the Joe Rogan style
Yeah.
podcast where they're 2 hour, 2.5 hour, 3 hour podcasts. And I'm like, dang, like I never expected myself to be one of those people. Cause I definitely like catch myself having like in a shorter attention span. And I try, like, I think that's kind of one of the ways I try to like, but make myself focus more on things and watch those longer form pieces. I think it's really interesting. And especially if it's the right, like you said, the right mix of guests, they can really extract a lot of really good information, a lot of really good nuggets, and just help you think about things in a different light, different manner. I think that's really, really cool. Let me touch on this. So let's dive into what brush pass research is. What is it? What are you guys doing over there aside from creating some really cool, some really cool LinkedIn posts and really good content?
Yeah, it's really a marketing playbook for freight tech companies to go out and sell to freight brokerages. Right? You have 30,000 MC numbers that are all freight brokerages, and it's a confusing mess if you step in, especially if you don't know any of the names.
Right.
Even below the top 100, it becomes a mess, right? Who's who?
Yeah.
How big are they? What are they doing? And being able to detail that down into different buckets based on size, based on what technology they're running, primarily TMS systems, right? Because that's the most important thing for most tech companies. And then getting into other things like rates and visibility and trying to just gather that company intel. And along with that, of course, you have contact information for the director level and above, what we call decision makers. So it's that data that you want in your CRM, whatever CRM you're using, doesn't really matter. That data that you want on day one that usually takes you 2 years, if ever, to actually really build out.
Yeah.
You can have it in your CRM within minutes. And you get updates with that as things change, as people move around, as people switch technologies, whenever new employees come on board, you can have those updates as well.
Now, how is what you guys are doing? And I know this will probably be a question, is how are you guys different than like a big box like Zoom Info for leads or one of those lead services?
Yeah. So how we're different is we are attacking a very specific niche. So instead of being an inch deep and a mile wide in every industry, which is good, especially if you're in freight brokerage, you sell to so many different industries that you need a great amount of data, right? But if you're selling a tool to the freight brokerage industry, you don't necessarily need all those different industries. You want to go a mile deep in one industry and know that in and out, because that's your target market, and that's what we provide. We are an inch wide and a mile deep, and we want to find out everything that you need to know about the market so you can go out and sell specifically to freight brokerages.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense as to some of the research and a lot of the data you guys put out, because it helps your core audience, which freight tech companies and companies that are targeting freight brokerages, if they know some of this data, like, hey, I know there was a stat you put out, over 25,000 new freight brokerages were created over a 3-year period, with only around like 9.7 thousand still alive. Well, I want to jump into that a little bit more shortly, but like that kind of relevant information for freight tech companies that may not know the freight space, that may not be as deeply ingrained in it as you and I are, or as the freight brokers are. So that way they can kind of have that data, have that insight, and really, I guess, hone in on their core audience is what it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly right. You have 29,000 freight brokerages out there. As you quoted, the last 3 years, you had 25,000 formed, and only roughly 10,000, 9.7 thousand that are still active. And then you take that, what percentage of those are still 1 or 2 employees?
Right.
A high percentage. And that 30,000 number, there is a very high percentage, probably 90%, are sub 5 employees, right? So if you are selling a product that doesn't really fit in that market, right? You need 10 seats to really have a hold of that market. Then there's a 90% of the market or so that you don't even need to speak to right now. You need to focus in on these 1,000, 2,000 companies, freight brokerages out there, and that's where your ICP resides. But getting to that point takes a long time and a lot of insight and knowledge and study and going through these things that we've already done.
Right.
We've done ready to serve up your marketing campaign, your go-to-market strategy, and we're willing to work with you and answer any questions you may have and guide you in the way you need to go.
Now, how can people, obviously be confident in the data? How do you guys source the data? How can people know that it's like really good, verifiable information?
Yeah, so we start with LinkedIn, right? So the names and the contacts come from LinkedIn. We have a variety of sources to give us, both employee numbers, kind of spend information and data, and we kind of fit all that together and triangulate on the size. And on the contact information side, on the emails, not only do we cleanse the emails, but we also send out emails ourselves, right? So we're constantly scrubbing that list, constantly adding new names, new leads. We have, say, most of the 10 million and above brokerages on there. We're starting to pull and collect data on the $1 to $10 million range, which there are probably another, say, 3,000 roughly out there that do that, that size, right? And so we're consistently scrubbing the information, and we know most of the people that certainly in the top 1,000 at these organizations. So we have some insight into that.
When some of these freight tech companies are looking for some of this data, who do you typically see them most looking? I guess, what data are they looking for the most? Is it the enterprise brokers, which everyone wants, or is it kind of some of the mid market to smaller brokerages as well?
I think the mid market to the smaller brokerages, right? So you can go on Transport Topics and get a list of the top 100, right?
Yeah.
Now, where do you get it in? Where are the contact details? Then you can come to us with that. But if you say sub 100 million, say 10 million to $100 million in gross revenue, then it becomes very murky, and that there's not really a list out there of who fits within that, and certainly who works there, who are the decision makers, and what technology that they're using. When we're talking about business intelligence, the TMS system is the most important thing for all freight tech companies. So if you're selling TMSs, you want to know who the incumbent is, of course. Yeah. If you are someone who wants to get integrations done to get into freight brokerages, you want to know who you should be integrating with, or who you need to integrate with, or who you need to work with TMS wise to secure that freight brokerage. So that on the competitive intelligence, I think everyone wants to know what TMS, and then you have specializations after that of, whether you have rating tools or, quick pay and payment vendors. They need their own set of data, but they're also looking for TMS as well.
What, I don't know if you have this off the top of your head. Do you know what, like the mid-market to large brokerage or brokerages, what TMSs are the most popular? Are proprietary? Is it an off the box, out of the box system? What do you know off the top of your head on that?
Off the top of my head, I should know this because I have that survey data out there, but I'm not looking at it right now. But if you're talking about over $100 million, proprietary, McLeod, Aljex, Turvo's coming up. If you're talking about 10 to 100 million, then you have that same class, right? Proprietary, McLeod, Aljex. But you also have Thai, Revenova, and Turvo, who are making strides on market share. And that's something that we see in the data as well, right? cloud-based systems are coming in to the folds. And I think it's a game of integrations, as you said, Thomas, a few minutes ago. I think that's really one of the most important buying points when it comes to TMSs or integrations, because you have all these great, wonderful tools that freight tech companies have invented and gone to market with over the last 5 or 6 years. And everyone wants to be able to work in all those different platforms in a seamless way.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's kind of where the market kind of is, or where it needs to go, and kind of how some of the players, and how kind of the shift in kind of the age in logistics is playing a factor in that, where more people more my age and your age are entering the space and pushing out a lot of the older generation that doesn't or hasn't utilized a lot of that technology. So we're bringing a lot of that new age technology into the space, and really helping, I guess, revolutionize what's happening in the space, because it is all about, like, what we're talking about, integrations, and being able to have all of those in one easy location, and not have to, be in your TMS and have 19 other windows open to be able to move a load, or check on a load, or check on this or that, or post a load, when you can just have everything very easily integrated, know your shipments on time, know you can post a load, unpost a load, do whatever it may be right within your TMS. And then, obviously with what you guys are doing, having that data so that freight tech companies can know what's happening, kind of with those brokerages as well, I think it's pretty solid.
Thank you.
Now, how are you guys conducting some of this research? How does, I guess, a lot of people like to try to conduct research, try to find out, some of these things. How do you guys go about doing some of this research?
Some of it's directly from me and some of my friends in the industry, and contacting freight brokerages and collecting this. I have a couple of people on the phone here and there who are making calls into freight brokerages and getting, the simple details of kind of pieces of their tech stack. And then we assemble all that into the data set.
No, I think that's really, really fascinating. I think that not a lot of people kind of know what goes into kind of some of that research and some of those aspects. Now, something I want to go back to and just kind of highlight, I had mentioned in some of the research you guys had found, over that 3-year period, over 25,000 new freight brokers were created, which, like around 10,000 are still around 9.7 thousand. How many, and this is obviously, it's not research or anything I don't think you have data on at the moment, but how many of those operations do you personally think were potentially double brokers or nefarious actors?
It's a really good question. This is a question that people ask me all the time, and I wish I had a better answer. I don't know, but I would have to say it's a high percentage. I would have to.
Yeah.
I would think that, especially if you look at the average lifespan from the time when a brokerage is MC numbers issued to when it's revoked, that average lifespan, if you take it historically, and then you take that historical number, and I forget the exact number of months that I had in there, and then you take over the last 3 years, it's halved. So it's been cut by 50%. Wow. So you have to think that, a lot of MC numbers or new brokerages that appear throughout time, right? Through the last 20 years, there's a high failure rate. It's kind of like running a restaurant, right? It's it's a very competitive market. You have to have a lot of financing. You have to have your customers, and you have to grow that customer base. And if you don't, you might as well just turn it.
Come on, Kevin. Right? I've heard on the internet, being a freight broker is the easiest thing in the world. I can work 6 hours a week, play golf the rest of the time, and make millions. Is that not true?
It is not true. It is not true. There's 100 different ways to make money that's easier than being a freight broker. I will tell you the worst. I won't say the worst. I will say the most difficult sales job I've ever had, and I've had a few, has been selling to shippers.
Oh, yeah.
It is by far the hardest thing to do as a freight broker because it is the competition is intense. There's so many freight brokerages out there. There's so many freight brokers in the seats at those freight brokerages, and they're all saying the same exact thing, which in essence, trust me, I'll be a great partner for you. There's 1,000 ways to say it, and shippers have heard all 1,000, and they hear it repeatedly. And it's hard to prove over the phone. It's hard to prove before you move a load how good you are, and you get turned down a lot, or at least I did.
Yeah, you definitely do. I think that's definitely one of those points that, a lot of the conversations online don't talk about. It's a lot of people who have freight but don't talk about, the long process it was to get some of that freight to the 25 or 30 years of connections to get to some of those points to make some of the really high dollar or to move or to get a lot of that really high dollar and high volume freight. It's interesting, right?
It's funny because the internet and YouTube has turned almost everything into a get rich quick schemes, right? There's a get rich quick scheme for almost everything, right? From drop shipping to X, Y, and Z. And it's funny to transfer that over to brokerage because it ain't unless your dad runs, $500 million in transportation revenue, he's going to give you something. It's very hard to, or your father-in-law or something, right?
Right.
It's very hard to get rich quick. It's very hard to get rich at all in this business.
Hey, listen, step one to becoming $1 million broker is become a freight broker. Step one. Step two, marry into a family that moves a lot of freight. Step three, profit.
You're exactly right.
Kevin, I appreciate your time today. I don't want to run too far over. Let me ask you this: where can the people find you? Where can they find Brush Pass Research if they're looking to look at some of the data and some of the research you guys have done, or are interested in some of your services?
Yeah, so I have two websites: brushpassresearch.com. And that's the database. You can sign up for a free account, do some initial searching online, validate the data yourself. And then brushpassresearch.blog is where all the research resides. There's a lot of great graphs that we've mentioned, TMS market share, rating tools market share, visibility market share, and more to come over in 2024 in general. And those are up there. You can read that. And please, if one of those fits within something that you'd want to put in a slide deck or a presentation, sales, external, internal, however you want to use that, grab that, copy, paste it into your materials.
Awesome. And if you guys like today's podcast, make sure you guys like and review. We'll have all of Kevin's links. They'll be down in the show notes, or if you're watching on YouTube, they'll be in the description, as well as links to a lot of the research we did talk about today. So that way you guys can check those out. Make sure you guys do check out our newsletters. They drop Monday and Wednesday, thinkfreight.io. And Kevin, we'll have you back real soon. I really appreciate you coming on, and we'll catch everyone in the next episode.
You bet. Thanks, Thomas. Always a pleasure. And again, thanks for having me on.
Of course. Anytime. We'll talk soon.